The Galactic Council's detention facility on Kepler 442b was considered escape-proof. Its crystalline walls could withstand plasma bombardment, its energy fields could contain beings from a dozen different species, and its automated systems had never failed in 3 centuries of operation. What it wasn't designed for, however, was housing humans. James Chen pressed his back against the cold wall of the detention cell, his brown eyes scanning the room methodically. Across from him, Lisa Rodriguez sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers working at something he couldn't quite see in the dim lighting. "Any luck with that control panel?" James whispered, though he suspected their captors were monitoring every word. Liza looked up, her dark hair falling across her face. "These Zephyrian circuits are more complex than I thought. But I've seen worse. Give me another hour." She held up a thin piece of metal she'd somehow extracted from her boot. Human engineering tends to be creative under pressure. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They'd been captured during what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic mission to establish trade relations with the hegemony of Tsar. Instead, they'd stumbled into a trap designed to demonstrate humanity's supposed weakness to the other council species. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in their assumptions about Deathworlders. 3 days earlier, when they'd first arrived at the Zephyrian homeworld, James had noted the reduced gravity, the filtered atmosphere, and the carefully controlled environment. Everything here was designed for comfort, safety, and predictability. The Zephyrians, with their elongated limbs and translucent skin, moved with the graceful efficiency of beings who had never known real danger. "They think we're just another species of primitives," James had muttered to Liza as they were escorted through the pristine corridors of the council building. "Look at how they handle us, like we might break." Now, imprisoned in their supposedly inescapable cell, James understood the depth of their captors' miscalculation. The Zephyrians had designed their prison for beings like themselves, logical, methodical, and bound by the limitations of their careful, controlled evolution. They hadn't accounted for the creativity born of chaos. The cell door's energy field hummed softly, its blue glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. James had been studying it for hours, noting the power fluctuations, the way it interacted with the facility's other systems. On Earth, such inefficiencies would have been deadly flaws. Here they were simply accepted limitations. "James," Liza's voice was barely audible, "I need you to create a distraction, something that will draw their attention for exactly 90 seconds. He looked at her modified control panel interface. She'd somehow managed to jury-rig a connection, using components from her communicator, her boot heel, and what appeared to be a strand of her own hair. It was the kind of improvisation that would have been impossible for species that evolved in safe, predictable environments. "What kind of distraction?" he asked. A slow smile spread across Liza's face. "The kind that reminds them why humans are classified as Deathworlders." James moved to the center of the room and began to hyperventilate, a technique that would flood his system with adrenaline and trigger responses that no other known species possessed. His heart rate spiked, his pupils dilated, and every muscle in his body prepared for violence. Then he screamed. It wasn't the controlled vocalization of civilized species. It was the primal, rage-filled battle cry of an apex predator from a world where everything was trying to kill you. The sound echoed through the facility's corridors, triggering alarms and sending Zephyrian guards scrambling to their monitoring stations. "Fascinating," came the voice of Commander Thexil through the cell's communication system. "The human appears to be experiencing some form of psychological breakdown, increased sedative levels in the atmospheric mix." What the commander didn't understand was that James wasn't breaking down. He was powering up. For 87 seconds, James continued his performance, drawing every available guard to observe the primitive human's apparent mental collapse. During those crucial moments, Liza completed her work on the control systems. The energy field flickered and died. "Now," she whispered. They moved with the fluid coordination of predators who had trained together for years. James took point, his enhanced reflexes and Deathworld-honed instincts guiding them through corridors designed for beings who had never needed to move with stealth or speed. Liza followed, her modified communicator now serving as both scanner and electronic warfare device. The Zephyrian facility was a maze of elegant curves and artistic flourishes, beautiful but completely impractical for security. There were decorative alcoves that provided perfect cover, lighting systems that cast concealing shadows, and ventilation grates large enough for human-sized infiltrators. "Security checkpoint ahead," Liza whispered, consulting her improvised scanner. 4 guards. James smiled grimly. The Zephyrians had made another critical error. They'd assumed their energy weapons would be sufficient deterrent for any prisoner. They hadn't considered what happened when you put those weapons in the hands of beings who had been fighting with crude tools for thousands of years. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. The Zephyrian guards, trained for crowd control and ceremonial duties, found themselves facing 2 humans who moved like liquid death through their perfect ordered world. By the time reinforcements arrived, James and Liza had vanished into the facility's service tunnels. "This is impossible." Commander Thexel's voice echoed through the facility's communication system. "Seal all exits, no one leaves this station." But the commander still didn't understand what they were dealing with. Humans didn't think in terms of exits and entrances. They thought in terms of weaknesses and opportunities. 20 minutes later, James and Liza stood in the facility's central power core, surrounded by the humming machinery that kept the entire station operational. Liza had jury-rigged a feedback loop using nothing but spare parts and human ingenuity. "One electromagnetic pulse," she said, her hand hovering over the improvised trigger. "It'll knock out their entire grid for 6 hours. Long enough for us to reach our ship and get a message to Earth." James activated his communicator, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is James Chen of the Human Diplomatic Mission. We are withdrawing our application for council membership. Humanity will remember this betrayal." He paused, looking directly into one of the facility's security cameras. "And this is why you never corner a Deathworlder." Liza triggered the pulse. In the darkness that followed, 2 humans slipped away into the night, leaving behind them a facility full of beings who finally understood the difference between intelligence and cunning, between evolution and survival. The Zephyrians had learned an important lesson about humanity that day. When you back a Deathworlder into a corner, you don't get a cowering victim. You get a predator with nothing left to lose.